Good morning, church, and welcome to week 3 of virtual church, video church. I'm not 100% sure what to call it, but I know this is 3 weeks of us not being able to gather. I know it's wearing on me. I don't know if it's wearing on you, but I can tell you that I am standing in the building that I hope it's not too much longer before we're able to get together and meet, see each other, hug each other, maybe, see how it goes, those types of things. I know I've been praying for a lot of you, praying for all of you, but specifically for those of you who fall into the essential category. I know that you're still working, you're exposed more than a lot of us who are able to kind of avoid public when we can, and I've been praying God's mercy on you in these strange days. Riverside County has been hit particularly hard in the last, particularly this last week, but we've lost 2 deputy sheriffs this week to complications from the coronavirus, and they're predicting a sharp rise in cases this week. So be safe and be in prayer for those in our county, those in our state, and really just all over the country, all over the world. As this is a crisis the entire world is going through at the same time, and those are rare. It's been over 100 years since the last time a worldwide crisis happened in this sense, and as far as pandemics go. World War II was probably the last time that the world was dealing with something entirely as a crisis, and that was over 75 years ago. So it's been a while. I appreciate Pastor Rick's prayer at the beginning of this. I ask you to continue to be in prayer as we all begin to continue to work through this together. We're going to continue through Daniel because Daniel, this book has a lot that can give us guidance and direction, particularly in this moment that we're in, currently what we're facing. So if you want to turn along with me, you can turn to Daniel 2. The text is actually going to be on your screen this morning. But let's read together in Daniel chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. In the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His spirit was troubled and his sleep left him. And then the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king, and the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. And then the Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell us your servants the dream, and we will show you its interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, The word from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses shall be laid in ruins. But if you show the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore show me the dream and its interpretation. And they answered a second time and said, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show its interpretation. And the king answered and said, I know with certainty that you are trying to gain time, because you see that the word is from me is firm. If you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one sentence for you. You have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the times change. Therefore tell me the dream, and I'll show you, and I shall know that you can show me its interpretation. And the Chaldeans answered the king and said, There is not a man on earth who can meet the king's demand. For no great and powerful king has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. The thing that the king asks is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. Because of this, the king was angry and very furious, and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. And so the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. And then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He declared to Arioch, the king's captain, Why is this decree of the king so urgent? And then Arioch made the matter known to Daniel. And Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him time that he may show the interpretation to the king. And then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, and told them to seek mercy from God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision in the night. And then Daniel blessed the God of heaven and answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever. To whom shall belong wisdom and might? He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give you praise. For you have given me wisdom and might, and you have made known to me what we ask of you. For you have made known to us the king's matter. Now, in this text, there's a lot happening in this story. I want us to just take a moment and remind ourselves of exactly what we're talking about here. You have to remember that Nebuchadnezzar, this king who had taken Daniel and Hananiah and Mishael and Azariah, taking them into captivity when they're just kids, young teenagers. Nebuchadnezzar is practically the ruler of the world at this point. He's conquered all the known major kingdoms, and the smaller kingdoms just decided to just give up, pledge loyalty to Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon, rather than fight, because they knew there was no hope. His kingdom is filled with the spoils of war, including vessels from the temple of Judah, Solomon's temple that he's taken, he's placed in his own temples. He's in the process of rebuilding Babylon and building new Babylon, building the Hanging Gardens of Babylon for one of his wives. And it's now considered one of the greatest cities that history's ever known, even to this day. Nebuchadnezzar has all the power. He has all the wealth. He has literally everything a human could want on this earth. He has reached the height of achievement as far as the world's concerned. And yet, the Scripture tells us that his spirit was troubled and his sleep has left him. Now, even in the midst of all of this success, Nebuchadnezzar can't find rest. He can't find spiritual rest. He can't even find physical rest. There's a famous quote by Augustine that this situation reminds me of, because Augustine says that he talks about the soul remaining restless until it finds its rest in God. And we see that here with Nebuchadnezzar. And if anyone should be satisfied in life, it should be Nebuchadnezzar. To have found peace and comfort in human achievement would be everything that this man would have thought he would have gained. Nebuchadnezzar had everything he could have ever wanted, but he did not have peace. And if we're going to find peace, if we're going to remain faithful in our own Babylon, we're going to if we're going to ever find freedom from that deep-seated sense of longing and insecurity that kind of haunts us and pulls at us and tugs at us, it will not be looking at human achievements. And that's one of the things we learn from this text. It will only be when we turn to God. It reminds me of the parable of the sower in Mark 4. You may be familiar with that passage, but there's one group in the parable of the sower that talks about the seed being sown among thorns. And it says this, it says, there are those who hear the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches and the desire for other things enter in, and they choke out the word, and it proves unfruitful. Now, you need to understand that the Babylonians' dreams it's hard for us to describe how important dreams would have been to the Babylonians. The ancient Babylonians believed that dreams were a message from the gods, and that a right understanding of a dream would be critical for their future. In this case, Nebuchadnezzar apparently feared that this strange revelation, this dream contained some kind of ominous message that he was about to lose it all. And so this troubled king, he calls his magicians and his sorcerers and the Chaldeans, these dream interpreters, and he tells them, he says, look, I've had a dream. and I need you to tell me the dream and tell me what it means. I'm troubled by this dream. Now, the Chaldeans were specifically trained to interpret dreams. This is one of the things that Daniel and his 3 friends have been doing for the last several years. They've been learning to train in these dreams, even though timeline on this, they probably weren't done with their training. And these Chaldeans, they actually had, they call them the Akkadians, and they actually had libraries that we found, even to this day, archaeologists have found, of these manuals for dream interpretation, where they interpreted these symbols to see what they meant, and they made comparisons between people's dreams that they would share, and they literally had classes on how to interpret dreams. I mean, to me, almost the modern day version of this would remind me of like Sigmund Freud and his book on dream interpretation, where everything had something to do with something in your past that had happened to you that you couldn't remember. And archaeologists found these Akkadian dream manuals that were used for this interpretation. And Nebuchadnezzar, he also called in his astrologers, who were the guys who would look at the stars and try and predict the future. And these enchanters and sorcerers who practiced these strange divinations. Like, for us, it'd be like reading tea leaves, but for them, they would kill animals and break open their organs or cut open their organs and try to read these cut up organs as if they had some kind of meaning, some kind of sign based on what they saw. And this is the practice that Deuteronomy 18 speaks so strongly against. It says, actually, anybody who commits sorcery should be executed in the same way as a murderer. It's one of the sins that caused God to judge Israel and cause them to end up being in Babylon in the first place, cause them to go into captivity. The same practice that Galatians 5 speaks against. And Nebuchadnezzar was distraught, so he called in his professionals of his day. These people were the political consultants, the analysts, the wise, the religious gurus, the ones who were supposed to know. And these men, to me, they ask the most reasonable question I think anyone could ask in this situation. They said in verse 4, look at it. O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show you the interpretation. But Nebuchadnezzar, he wasn't buying it. Tell me the dream. I mean, that's a reasonable question. We're dream interpreters. We're not dream tellers. You tell us the dream, we'll interpret it for you. And Nebuchadnezzar says, the word from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you'll be torn limb from limb, and your houses shall be laid to ruins. And that is not exaggeration. That is exactly what Nebuchadnezzar would have done, because we know that from history that he had already done that to people. And as much as experience as these men had in interpreting dreams, there was nothing in their training on how to tell someone what they dreamed. And the king here he's the one that broke protocol. You tell us the dream, and we'll tell you what it means. And I've heard it said that Nebuchadnezzar, the reason he was in this position was because he couldn't remember the dream. But there's nothing in the text that really implies that. In fact, I think we see his motivation for not telling them the dream in verses 8 and 9. In verse 8 it says, the king answered and said, I know with certainty that you're trying to gain time because you see the word from me is firm. And if you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one sentence for you. You've agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the times change. Basically, until he changes his mind. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me its interpretation. See, I think Nebuchadnezzar realizes here that it's going to be easy for these guys to pull out their books, consult their stars, cut open some livers, read this thing, and tell Nebuchadnezzar what they think this dream means when they don't have any idea. And I think Nebuchadnezzar was aware of that, because at this point, he begins to lose trust in everything. At this point, he has lost trust in everything that brought him comfort. He had money, he had power, he had direct access to the smartest and wisest minds in the kingdom. Everything that should bring him hope according to human understanding, but he still doesn't have hope. He only has distress. So he's so distressed that he's willing to destroy everything in his kingdom that would be considered wisdom. Where is he going to turn? There's nowhere else to turn. But in verse 10, we see the Chaldeans, they they stumbled into some wisdom here, almost. Out of desperation, they speak to the king. They tell the king, here's what they say. They said, look, king, only the gods can answer your questions, and those gods do not interact with men of flesh. No God lives among men. In other words, the gods know, but where are they? They're not here. And honestly, if you understand who these sorcerers and enchanters and magicians and Chaldeans who claim they be, this was an insane, it was a striking admission, because they claim to be in touch with the spiritual world. And if the gods knew their dream, whoever revealed the dream must be in touch with the gods. And these Babylonian men, see, they were half right. They were almost right, because there was no human being that could tell Nebuchadnezzar his dream. But there is a God that lives among people, who dwells among his people, who works and interacts with his people. And that's Daniel's God. And by this point, though, Nebuchadnezzar's done. All right? Everything that he's put hope in has failed him. He has been living among liars and frauds, and he truly decides to kill them. But ultimately, I believe what made him so angry wasn't that these guys had been lying to him directly. I think at this moment, Nebuchadnezzar realized his own weakness. We've talked about for the last several weeks of how Nebuchadnezzar thought he was in control. And this is a situation where Nebuchadnezzar realizes he has no control. No one can answer this question for him. He's fearful of this dream, that he's going to lose everything he's put his hope in. And he brings him his wisdom, and his wisdom fails him. And this Nebuchadnezzar's been living in Romans 1:25, where it talks about worshiping created things more than the Creator. And Nebuchadnezzar's created his world. And now he's being awakened to just how frail he is as a human. And this made Nebuchadnezzar angry, because he knew they were right and that everything he had put his faith in was being torn down, and he realizes he's not in control. We see this in verse 12. Look at it. It says, because of this, the king was angry and very furious, and he commanded the wise men of Babylon to be destroyed. So the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. And then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill him. He declared to Arioch, he said, look, what's going on with this king? Why is this so urgent? And not just urgent, why so sudden, so swift? Why is this judgment on us? You know, because Daniel was part of the Chaldeans. He was obviously not in the court at the time, but he's still a part of this group, part of these wise men. Why? What's going on here? And so Arioch shares with Daniel what's happening. And Daniel, it says, he dealt with this with prudence and discretion. Now, you got to realize, Daniel is 17 or 18 years old at this point. This isn't some long hair, long white beard, ancient, old, wise Daniel. This 17 or 18-year-old young man shows tremendous restraint and tact and discretion in how he deals with what is his sure death. The executioner standing at his door. He goes to the king and he asks for some time. And what does Daniel do with his time? This is really where this story ramps up. What does Daniel do with his time? This is what I want us to see this morning. Daniel is faced with a literally impossible task. He's helpless. There's nothing he can do. There's nothing he can fix. There's no book he can read. There's no class he can take. There's no coach, no guru he can call for advice. There's no television show that's going to fix this for him. Dr. Phil is not going to fix this for him. Oprah's not going to fix this for him. His favorite news person, politician, his favorite podcaster, there's nothing he can go to that's going to fix this for Daniel. People all around him, Daniel, have begun to die and are dying and are on the chopping block. So what does he do? Look in verse 17. It says, Then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, and told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. And then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in vision of the night. Daniel, when faced with an impossible situation, he turned to prayer. He turned to God. He went to his friends and said, guys, here's where we are. Here's the situation we're in. And here's what we need to do. We need to pray. Now, there's a couple of obvious lessons in this text. One, prayer. Two, get others to pray with you. But too often, I think we talk about prayer more than we actually pray. But however, we see Daniel and his friends, when things were impossible at their worst, they had this attitude of prayer. It was their go-to. It was their gut reaction. We've got to go to God. And the interesting thing here to me, the thing that just jumped out to me at this text, struck me, and actually convicted me, was that Daniel, he instructed them to pray. But do you notice in verse 18 what he tells them to pray? He says, seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery. Seek mercy. That's the wrong prayer, right? Why are you seeking mercy, Daniel? You need to seek the answer. God, give me the answer. God, give us the answer to this dream. No, Daniel said, no. Grant mercy, God. Give us mercy. And at first, this seemed to me to be a little self-centered. But in fact, it's not. In fact, I actually think humility is the only way you can ask for mercy. Because a prayer for mercy recognizes that God is above us. And that He's the only one that can grant mercy. And praying for the answer, God, give me the answer. That's a relationship between us and God that's more like God is our genie than it is God is it's a God grant us a wish more than it is God. You're the only one that can help us. Prayer for mercy acknowledges God as God. God is higher. God is holy. God is sovereignly in control of the outcome. And we see this attitude as it carries over and over and over throughout the rest of the book of Daniel. We see it even in the first chapter of the last 2 weeks. God, don't give us what we want. Show us mercy and give us what you believe we need. And God gave Daniel the dream and the interpretation of the dream. And Daniel spontaneously breaks out in praise to God. And one of the most amazing hymns recorded in all of Scripture, you could call this the Psalm of Daniel. In verse 20, Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. And He changes times and seasons, and He removes kings and He sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. And He reveals deep and hidden things, and He knows what's in the darkness, and the light dwells within Him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give you praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and you now made known to me what we ask of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. And when he was done praying, he broke out in praise to the answered prayer of God. He didn't rush to Nebuchadnezzar, say, "Whoo, man, we got the answer. Let's deal with this before we get killed." No, he turned to God in worship and thankfulness. And the amazing thing is what we see in Daniel and these three other young men is that they had this God-centered reaction in the midst of crisis. And he had a God-centered reaction when the crisis was over. Now, I know for sure that this pandemic has driven a lot of people to prayer that haven't prayed in a long time. But this isn't going to last forever. A few more weeks, worst case, months. But where will you be when it's over? If this drove you to your knees now, will you break out in praise to God when it's over? In your own life, when you face crisis and God uses these crises to drive you to your knees. Turn to God. Do you break out in praise when it's over? This is actually the true spiritual test of our faith. Do we praise God in the bad times and the good times? The test of our spirituality, it doesn't lie in the frequency of our prayers in times of crisis, but in how we worship God through acts of grace and relief. Do we worship God when everything is going well? And in the biblical narrative, we see two responses to crisis. I mean, we do. We see a king who had placed all of his hope in everything temporary. His confidence, his dependence, all of these things were tied up in things that could easily be destroyed. And he's living there right now. He called for the wisdom of the world and found it lacking. He couldn't find an answer to his questions, and his first response was to get angry and just destroy it all. Burn it down. If I can't have peace, then you can't have peace either. And then we see Daniel. Daniel, when faced with sure death, the executioner is at his door, and Daniel turns to God. He turned to God's wisdom, and God answered his prayer. And when the prayer was answered, he turns to God in thanksgiving. But the contrast between these two men comes down to one single question. It comes down to the question of, where do you put your faith? When trouble comes, where do you turn? The wise men of Nebuchadnezzar's court, they had worldly wisdom. We're wise. Listen to us. We've discovered the mysteries of the universe. And we look back at them today and we mock them as just poor pagans who just didn't understand because they didn't know, they didn't know the things we know today. Today we have true wisdom. We understand science and philosophy and psychology and medicine. We've discovered the mysteries of the universe. Now, hear me. I'm not dismissing science and philosophy and psychology and medicine. Those are all good things when used correctly. But just like Nebuchadnezzar, there's going to come a day when those things let you down because they will not lead you to God. Because God is the source of all wisdom. And where do you turn when there's nowhere else to turn? When all of the things you've placed your hope in have failed you? And for Christians, we should have already turned to God. I hope that we'll find a way to deal with this coronavirus. I really do, and I expect we will. We've got some brilliant minds working on it. A lot of the wisdom of our age working on it. But my real hope, my eternal hope, is not in a vaccine or some miracle that comes from malaria drugs. My real hope is in a holy God who's created the universe, who understands what's going on, who wasn't caught off guard by this virus. The God that Daniel says changes the times and the seasons, and he removes kings and he sets up kings, and he gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things, and he knows what's in the darkness, but light dwells in him. And that's my prayer, is that as believers, as we're faced with crisis, even living in a crisis right now, that we are immediately driven to prayer. Immediately turning to God and saying, God, we're gonna go through this. And God, we're gonna trust you through this. We're gonna pray through this, pray for mercy. God, that you give us not what we want, but what you know we need. Turning to God in bad times and turning to God in good times. Not assimilated into the culture like we talked about last week, where our gut reactions are placing our hope in people and ideas rather than the God of the universe. That's where I want us to get as a church. That's where I want us to get as believers, to where our gut reaction, our go-to reaction is to turn to God. Now, I over the last several weeks, we've been checking numbers on these live streams, and I can tell you the numbers are much larger than the amount of people that we have sitting in the church building. usually on Sunday mornings. And I don't know everyone that's watching these things. I don't know who you are. I don't know your background. I know we've had, even the last week, we had 4 or 5 people never heard of in my life watching this live stream from different states. And I don't even know if they're watching today. But I want to speak to you just really quickly about true wisdom and where you can turn when there's trouble in your life. And I want to speak to someone who may be watching this at home right now, quarantined in the midst of crisis and looking for just some semblance of hope. And I think about 1 Corinthians 1:18 that speaks, it contrasts wisdom and foolishness. And it talks about the message of the cross being foolishness to those who are perishing. But for those of us who are being saved, it's the power of God. Because God says, I'll destroy the wisdom of the world. The intelligence of the intelligent, I'll frustrate. And he asked the question, where's the wise person? Where's the teacher of the law? Where's the philosopher? Has God not made foolish the wisdom of the world? And it goes on to talk about it's the cross that's true wisdom. And the world mocks and laughs at those of us who believe in the good news of the gospel, that Jesus Christ, God in the flesh, the Son of God, came to earth, was born as a human, born as a man, baby in a manger, Christmas time, all those things. The fact that we believe that he grew up, died for our sins, was buried, resurrected, and now because of that, because we accept this, we can go to heaven. It's seen as foolishness, but I want you to take just 3 more minutes and watch a brief presentation on the gospel and ask God to help you find hope right now on this Sunday morning. Watch this with me, and then I'll give you some instructions right after this is over.